Welcome, Maria, to episode 8 of the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. For those tuning in, today we have Maria Amiouni, who's a spiritual and human design coach.
Yes.
I guess we'll start by diving a little bit into that and explaining what exactly that is, what is it that you do, and how you fell into this whole career path, and maybe also your journey a little bit into healing, which we'll get into a little bit later on.
Okay, great. So basically, my journey towards becoming a spiritual coach really started with health coaching, actually. So due to like a lot of external factors, burnout, feeling extremely fatigued all the time, having
Yep.
a lot of gut health issues, acne, working a corporate job I didn't love.
Sure.
Like there was just a bunch of different things that I was experiencing.
This was in
And
Dubai, or where
this
was
was
this?
in London. I was
Okay.
living in London. So before I came on this journey, I
Yep.
basically started off in the corporate world. I worked for a hedge fund for about 4 years and I was doing business development. And although I did learn a lot, I also knew very early on that it wasn't the path for me.
Sure.
And through that, I really delved deeply into different practices. So the yoga practice, meditation, Reiki, and coaching. And I was doing all of these things more so for myself
Sure.
rather than thinking that I was going to bring that to anybody else.
Right.
I really wanted to understand, who am I? What is my purpose? Why did I come here on this
Right.
planet? You
Sure,
know, like
sure.
I feel like these were like existential questions I was having in my mid 20s. And so I was like, okay, it's worth exploring because this is something that I don't want to have to question when I'm 50 years old and I stayed on a career path that I didn't love. Like, I
Right.
might as well do this now. And I decided eventually to quit my job and to take that leap of faith after many, many months of being in and out of it
Good
and
for
saying
you.
yes, no, yes, no. Eventually, interestingly, it was both my parents that encouraged me to quit
Awesome. That's
because
great.
of how they saw me as so far away from who I really was. They
Right.
could recognize that I wasn't myself. I was feeling very down. I was crying all the time. Like I mentioned, the acne had really taken over. So for me, that was like a very big thing.
Wow.
And I didn't want to heal that the conventional way.
Sure.
So I went into the health coaching path, but it took some time, honestly. It wasn't something that I felt confident enough. It's like, who's going to listen to a
Sure.
26-year-old? Like, what life experiences do they think that I've been through to take advice from me?
Right. Right.
And so there was a lot of work around like self-worth and really understanding who I was and why it was that I was feeling this way.
Sure.
And so I did more learnings and excavations and asking people, hey, why am I here? Like,
Yep.
you know, through your modality, can you tell me? And so that's how I came across human design too. And when it finally explained to me energetically how I was designed and why I was feeling a certain way, I realized personally that healing could never really happen unless you had a deeper understanding of who you were energetically, and that you could recite all the mantras and you could
Right.
do all of the right things, eat the right foods, have the right friends, and
Sure.
even with that, not be totally at ease with yourself.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I weaved in spirituality, because that was the foundation for me, at least, to greater transformation and greater healing.
Awesome.
And so that's what I bring to people, and that's what I feel like has truly empowered my path and
Good
my
for
journey.
you. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. So, what exactly is a human design coach? Like, if you were to explain that.
Yeah, so human design is a system that stems from many different esoteric systems, including astrology, quantum physics, the I Ching from China, the
Awesome.
Vedic philosophies from India,
Yeah.
Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, and it brings all of that together based on your birth details. So similarly to astrology,
I see.
there is your birth, your date, your month, your year, and your place of birth.
Sure.
And there's like a body graph that is generated, and it tells you this is like the blueprint of who you came here to be.
Okay, interesting.
And it's like this is your soul's DNA in a lot of ways.
Right.
You came here to experience this reality in this way, and these are your gifts and your talents. And
Sure.
a lot of times people are like, really? Like, this is it?
Yeah.
And they know it to be true,
Right.
but at the same time, they've been so conditioned to see themselves differently.
Right. Right.
And it's a really fascinating tool for people to explore themselves a little bit more and to just give themselves permission.
Right.
For me, it's been like a permission slip. Okay, I've been designed this way. Why am I trying to operate like everybody else? I'm
Sure.
not meant to be that way.
Sure. Interesting.
And it just gives you that deeper level of acceptance to self and to the way that you've been so uniquely designed to experience this world.
Wow, that's super interesting. Is it similar to there was something else called something with keys? I can't remember the name
Gene
now.
keys.
Gene keys, yeah.
So gene keys stems from human design.
Okay.
And more so from like the I Ching, which is the Chinese system that is
Sure.
super ancient.
Sure.
That allows people to understand their different gifts and their talents.
Right.
So there's a lot of parallels between human design and the gene keys when we're talking about something called the gates in your human design chart. There are these little circles that you'll see,
Sure.
and they just are like portals to more of your gifts and more of your talents.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So someone would come to you and then you'd run this, what is it, like a...
It's a program. I don't really have much understanding in terms of how it
Sure.
generates it. It's pretty in depth. And
Yeah.
so it goes into all of that and it generates the chart. And this is your blueprint. So meaning this is how you're going to be for your whole entire life.
Right.
However, when you explore it a little bit more, you see that actually when you're interacting or engaging with other people, you're also picking up on their energetics, especially if that's something that you don't have in your own. So you get to realize that you get to experience everything that this life has to offer at some point in your life through different interactions, through the way that the planets are spinning sometimes. It activates certain gene keys or certain gates.
Right.
And
Right.
it just, again, gives you this deeper understanding of you do experience everything there is to experience. And everybody's really kind of mirroring each other too.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I've done a gene key run with a friend of mine.
Okay.
She is a I don't know what the name is, gene key instructor or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I did one with her, and honestly, it was fascinating. You know, back in the day, I used to think all of this stuff is a little bit like hula, you know, like horoscopes and gene keys, and you know, all these things weren't necessarily like applicable or true. But it's funny, once once life takes you in that direction, you start to feel things more than just believe them, right?
I feel like that's really important, by the way. So I started off my journey being a skeptic of everything.
Yeah, same here.
And I feel like it's not a bad thing when you realize that skepticism can be a doorway to deeper understanding of things that you don't necessarily understand,
Right.
and gives you the chance to have direct experience. So for you to really feel, what is this bringing into my life?
Right.
So rather than just being gullible or naive, there's this curiosity. As long as you're curious enough to explore something that feels so unfamiliar, great, you can be skeptical.
Right.
But if the skepticism is closing you off from learning and actually even more so unlearning what it is that you already know, then that's where no growth can happen.
Absolutely.
Because you're completely bottled up and you're like, nope, this is it. This is my world. This is my reality. I'm not going to
Absolutely.
expand beyond what I know.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. You know, it's important to be so you can close your off with skepticism, or you can open up because of it.
Exactly.
So I think you put it in a very beautiful way.
Yeah. Because I was that.
Everybody
you
was.
know?
I was
like,
as well,
I
right?
was that way.
Everybody was.
But I was just curious. I was like, I want to learn. I want to know. Like, show me. Maybe I don't know everything.
Absolutely.
Be humble enough that you don't know everything.
100%. What you're saying now, Maria, is super important, because what I realize is that, you know, since we're born, we're all heavily conditioned into believing everything, right? So as soon as you're born, it's like, okay, this is your nationality, this is your religion, this is your race, this is how the world works, and go. You know, that's our blueprint from day one. We're told this starts with our family, with our parents, schools, societies, religions, social media, news, everything, right? It's like super conditioning from day one. And then we're told that life is the way it is. You know, our job is to, you know, follow the rule book or the blueprint, essentially, which is, you know, go to school, go to university, get a good job, save some money, maybe have family, kids, grow old, grandkids that pass away, and that's what life is about, right? Um, but life can be a little bit broader than that once you start to, it's funny because it's either by desperation or by inspiration that you can discover a much broader aspect to life. And that's what happened with me, basically. I was also in a, how do I call, like a rat race, essentially, right? I was living life at like 1,000 miles per hour, work, this, that. Like I didn't have a second to slow down until my body forced me to slow down. So similar to what you were saying earlier on, I was just living life at like I said, like 1,000 miles per hour. And then when I finally took the time to slow down, because, in this day and age, everything is so hustle and bustle. The hustle culture is very much pushed upon us. And now you have things like social media, pushing the, go, go, go narrative. It really makes you unwell in a sense, right? So that's when I decided to slow down, decided to start healing myself because I realized how unwell I was as well. And then beauty started to unfold from that. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Thank you, by the way, for sharing and
Of
also
course.
for doing the work and to choose to do it differently than
Appreciate
what
it.
it is that you've learned
Yeah.
to be true.
Yeah.
Because it does require so much courage. And also, when we talk about really breaking free from these conditionings,
Yeah.
it's also taking full responsibility for your life, right?
Yes.
Without blaming
Yes.
anybody else and saying, okay, like I am the way that I am because my parents didn't love
Yeah.
me, or because I grew up in this kind of environment, or
Right.
because XYZ happened in my life. So I am meant to be this way.
Correct.
And rather saying, actually, I can see that there's something really off with the way that things are.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I'm meant to bring something new into the world.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's where it gets exciting, to realize that there isn't just one way of walking your path, that there are
Sure.
so many different paths, and every single person has their own journey to walk and
Absolutely.
discover.
And it's unique.
And it's unique, and it's meant to be unique.
Absolutely.
And of course, we can be inspired by others and what it is that they choose to do. For me personally, though, I feel like it's more so like explore your inner world, and from that exploration, allow your intuition to guide you into a new place that is unfamiliar.
Absolutely.
And that hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to really plant the seeds for generations to come to live in a world that is so different to this one.
Absolutely.
Because the one that we're living in is
Not so
not the
good.
way to go, right?
No, I agree. It's yeah, it's like messed up in a lot of ways, right? You see so much suffering, so much unhappiness around the world, and it stems from just people, doing things that are out of alignment with their genuine, authentic self. That's essentially why people get miserable or sick or unhappy, is because they're living a life that they're not happy with, right? Because they want to fit in with society, societal expectations, maybe religious expectations, government expectations, whatever it is. So we're sticking to a certain crowd without actually questioning, is this for me, right? So yeah, like you said, it's about following that unique path. And it's difficult because nobody really wants to, step in uncharted territory or waters because it's scary, it's uncomfortable, it's, yeah, you just don't have the like full blueprint ahead of you. So it's a little bit like nerve-wracking when you first get on this journey. But then it's like you have a choice, or at least for me, I had a choice. Either I stay unhappy and unwell, or I have to trek out into this path and see, where the universe takes me, essentially. So I didn't really have a choice at that point, and I was just like, okay, so this is what I got to do, and this is what I'm gonna do, basically.
Exactly. And it's interesting because, like you said, it's either going to come from a place of, I really don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah, desperation or inspiration. That's
Exactly.
how it happens.
Or I'm going to do this now because I know where this is going to lead me towards. So while I was working corporate, I had some of the craziest thoughts one can have. And it was like, oh, when I get sick,
Yeah.
I will leave my job.
Yeah.
Or like when somebody gets hurt, then I will leave my job. Like it always entailed like some really dark thought
Yeah.
or event to happen for
Sure.
me to be like, now I will have the courage to leave.
Right.
I was like, that's such a twisted way of waiting for life to throw you a ball at your face to get hit, rather than saying, hey, like there's something wrong and I feel it internally, and I would rather move the needle now
Absolutely.
than wait for some external event to sweep the rug from under my feet. Because
Absolutely.
once you're collaborating with the universe, once you're like, hey, by the way, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to really tune into that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hone the gifts and the talents that you've planted in me, and I'm going to follow that call. I don't know where it's going because you're a creative force, and how do we know where these creative forces lead us?
Right.
And I'm just going to trust. I'm going to surrender. And that's going to then make me confront every single thing I've ever learned about life and about myself. And it's like, oh, I'm going to have to let go of people pleasing. Oh, I'm going to have to let go of my parents' approval of me.
Yep.
I'm going to have to, really come into my own being and trust myself and love the self, even though, it's not the norm
Right,
to do any
absolutely.
of those things, to prioritize your satisfaction in a world that maybe sees it as selfish or sees it as very confronting. And I remember when I did do the things back then where I was leaving my job or a relationship or a city and all of that, I was triggering a lot of people around
Right.
me
Right.
that weren't doing any of that, and that felt that my life was mirroring to them the things that they wish they wanted to do for themselves, but the way that it was being projected out came into like, I'm triggered by you. You're disturbing me. What you're showing me is not what I
Right.
want to see.
Absolutely.
I don't like to know that you're not working so hard on a Monday. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah,
Like, this
yeah.
is not the way. And it's like, actually, maybe it's not maybe it's not the way, but it's my
Yeah.
way.
Yeah,
It works
absolutely.
for me.
Absolutely, 100%. And like you said, Maria, most people or everybody, so when you do something and people react to it, it's almost always just a projection of their inner state or their inner view on things, right? Because you could do the very same thing, 20 people will hate it, 20 people will applaud you for it, right? And you're doing the exact same thing. So it's just a matter of surrounding yourself with people that maybe support your cause. And then the minute you take a different action, some people might not approve of it, like you said, and those people might fall away or decide maybe not to interact with you anymore. But then I found that other people will fall into alignment with your new decision or your new self. So all you got to do is really keep going on that path, and you'll find that naturally you'll surround yourself with like-minded individuals. That's what's been, happening with me.
I do believe that the universe does reward the courageous.
Yeah, for
I
sure,
really do
for
feel
sure.
that way. It might not be in the ways that you think you should be rewarded sometimes,
Absolutely.
because it's not gift wrapped in that like perfect bow, and it
Yeah.
comes sometimes in like multiple deliveries,
Yeah.
not just in like, here, this is one great gift.
Yeah.
For all of the leaps of faith that you've taken. But I feel like the greatest gift is the internal peace that you feel inside, and the trust that you've cultivated along the way to stand on your own 2 feet, and the resilience that has come through
Yeah.
with having to stand your ground and having to speak your truth and having to say no or say yes or whatever it might mean to you. I feel like that for me has been quite the journey.
Absolutely, and it's super well put. Like the way you're saying it is absolutely is the way it is, because if you're not in alignment with your own intuition, you will please a lot of people, but then you will be left feeling empty or yeah, not well, basically.
It's so true. I
yeah.
feel like that's probably where a lot of dis-ease happens. It's like you're no longer at ease with yourself.
Absolutely.
Because you're no longer listening to yourself.
Absolutely.
And that voice doesn't ever stop. And it might feel like, okay, it's just a whisper.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit of a nudge. Oh,
Exactly.
here's a bit of an accident. Here's a bit of a this.
Exactly.
And then it's like a really big catastrophic event. And you're like, wait a minute, like, how did I land here?
Absolutely.
And I will also say, though, because this has been part of my journey, because I also experienced things even when I was in alignment that felt really hard to navigate. So some things are very much out of our control.
Right.
And I had to undergo like surgery not too long ago, like a couple of years ago. And it was at a time where I was doing everything right, like eating right,
Sure.
meditating,
Yeah.
quit the job,
Yeah.
was doing all the things. And it was still something that happened.
Sure.
And even in that, it's like life is so divinely orchestrated and so intelligent that even if you don't comprehend it on the level of the mind and from a logical perspective, it is asking you to dive deeper into yourself.
Absolutely.
And how much more wisdom can we receive once we allow ourselves to go there? And perhaps when I mean there, I mean to the darker parts of who you are or your story or your ancestry or whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Yeah, because, chronic illnesses, we think they're sometimes isolated events like, oh, I'm just getting sick because of that, or I'm just getting anxious because of this. We look at it as very individualized symptoms that are happening, but often they're pointing towards something that needs changing or healing or fixing. So these chronic illnesses that you can get are essentially signal lights, like a car engine, signal light that something needs to be tweaked. And the problem is a lot of people treat those symptoms based on the symptoms themselves, right? So like, oh, I keep getting a lot of headaches. So instead of deciding to see why am I getting all these headaches, we pop a Panadol. Or I'm getting very anxious, for example. So instead of triggering or seeing what's triggering the anxiety, anti-anxiety medication or benzodiazepines or whatever it is, right? So that's what Western medicine in general focuses on, is treating the symptoms as opposed to getting into the root cause, which is more of a holistic approach to changing things around. So it's a great point that you mentioned. And coming back to following your intuition, which you also mentioned a little bit before, how do you feel, or how do you find, or how do you do that, basically?
It's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you go
So like
first.
human design actually dives really deeply into this.
Okay.
It says that everybody has kind of like their way of knowing what is true for them or not.
Yep.
In my case, speaking things out loud is what helps me figure out what's for me or not for me.
Interesting, okay.
And it's really in the tone of my voice and how I say something. And this was even before I even knew about that.
Yep.
I recognized that this was the case for me whenever it came to a big decision in my life, when I started to open up my throat and feeling a little bit more safe expressing myself.
Sure.
I would speak things out loud to people I could trust, and suddenly like something would come out and I'd be like, oh my God, like, yes, like that's it. Like that's
Right.
what I need to do.
Yeah.
And I couldn't shake the feeling off.
Wow.
And that's how I felt like, okay, this is how I come to know what it is I want to do.
Right.
Or it could be journaling, and then I'd like, write without thinking about what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And this is where I recognize, oh, actually, I am depressed working this corporate job. I've written this every single day of the week.
Sure.
And it's the same thing. It's, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I don't like this.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I think your soul is kind of speaking to you here.
Right.
Listen.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's different ways for people. I would say in general, does it expand you energetically? Like, do you feel an increase in energy when you say yes to this? Or do you feel depleted? Do you feel like you're agreeing to something because you truly want either the experience or whatever it is that you're going to receive
Right.
from saying yes?
Yeah.
Or is it more so that you're saying yes because you want to please that person,
Sure,
because you want to
sure.
disappoint them, because you're used to being the person to serve everybody else before
People-pleasing,
yourself.
yeah.
Exactly. So I feel like for me, the key thing is if there's an expansion in your energy, if there's an excitement, if there's a satisfaction, if there's deeper peace, if there's a diminishing of resistance, internal and external,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes though you don't know, like I've found myself sometimes even asking myself, like, is my intuition guiding me towards the easiest path?
Right.
And sometimes the answer is no.
Absolutely.
It's not making the easy decision.
Absolutely.
It's asking me to take actually a decision that is confronting and
Yeah.
challenging, and I want to have to do it.
Sure.
So it's not about the ease in the answer of your intuition, but it's more so about the peace, the satisfaction, the expansion of energy, the space that you create in your life as well
Right.
when you go for that decision.
Absolutely. You know, feeling, Marie, I find that most of us are out of tune with our feelings. Like you were saying earlier, we tend to rely on the logical mind, which is just a accumulation of all your past conditioning experiences, right? But that has nothing to do with how you feel inside, right? And it's because since we're young, we're taught to ignore our feelings, right? We're all suppressing so many of our emotions since childhood, basically, right? We're taught to suppress our emotions, which basically gets you out of alignment with your intuition. As kids, we're spot on with our intuition, right? If we're hungry, we want to grab something. If we're annoyed, we cry. We're very expressive. Kids know exactly what they want, right? They're fully in tune with their intuition. Problem becomes the older people who are supposed to know better then tell the young people to get out of alignment with their intuition, suppress your emotions. And then we lose touch with our feelings, essentially. And like I said, we repress and stuff and store all these emotions. And then later on, when you have so much bundled up and stored emotions, that's essentially where you get so off track with your wellness, because emotions are quite literally, I'm sure you know this, stored in the body until you decide to feel them, essentially. And that's what healing, a big part of healing is actually feeling your suppressed emotions, right? Since we're young, you're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to do this. So you suppress anger, you suppress rage, you suppress whatever. And then all that turns out to be, comes out later in the form of symptoms, in terms of like maybe you get depressed or anxious. This is all unfelt emotions and feelings. And the minute you decide to feel it all, which again is part of healing, so I'm sure on your healing journey, you probably had an emotional roller coaster, essentially, right? Or at least I did, right? So I had the rage, I had the anger, I had the grief. There was so much grief as well in healing. There's so much that you have to grieve, right? There's things in childhood that you may have missed, so you have to grieve part of your childhood that you never got. Maybe certain family members weren't the way you wanted them to be, so you have to grieve that. And there's just so much grief. And if you don't feel that, it's going to stay stored inside until you decide to feel it. Otherwise, it's going to manifest in other ways, basically.
Exactly. Grief is very much stored in the lungs and the chest. So a lot of the times that's where we keep the grief.
Absolutely.
And
right in the heart chakra.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's a very big one. And I feel like even just observing and witnessing and bearing witness to everything that's happening in the world, that in itself can make you feel a lot of grief, because even though things are not happening to you directly, it's still affecting you because we are so deeply interconnected. Nothing is separate from the other.
Of course.
And that's the issue, like you were mentioning earlier. We put a band-aid on wounds and we move along thinking that that's going to be okay and that's going to suffice, only to then revisit it later down the line because now it's deepened and it hasn't properly healed. Now, at the same time, for us as well to give ourselves a bit of grace, because I've realized this too, you know, when you're younger, you don't always have the capacity to feel the depth of that emotion. It's too big of a feeling. Nobody's really teaching you how to feel it completely.
Exactly.
And it's also sometimes the body's way of protecting itself. And so later down the line, when you've increased your capacity to hold more of these emotions, you can feel into them a little bit more, trusting yourself, knowing that you've got yourself at least, that you're not going to, you know, lose yourself completely in all of these different emotions or the stories that are associated to these emotions. Because sometimes that's what can happen too. It's like you really get attached to the story that now, again, it's like you're rationalizing why you're feeling a certain way rather than just crying for the sake of crying because it's moving through you without necessarily linking it to a specific story.
Absolutely.
So I feel like the body is really intelligent, and so it will process things when it needs to.
Absolutely.
And not to force that on us, because I did that, and
we all did,
that was a little bit intense. But you learn from it. But it's more so like with the awareness today, I just trust my body's wisdom so much more to bring the things it needs to bring at the time it's bringing it up. And in that moment, choosing to be different and to have a different type of relationship with myself and
Right.
with whatever is arising.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to add to your point, another, another reason why a lot of us tend to not feel our emotions is because we are subconsciously suppressing them with what's considered very normal in society, right? So things like drinking alcohol, smoking, even over caffeination. Everybody's like over caffeinating on coffee and energy drinks and this and that, right?
The dating culture as well.
Exactly. You can numb it with relationships, you can numb it with recreational substances, you can basically numb your feelings with pretty much
Netflix.
Netflix,
Yeah.
doom scrolling on social media, on Instagram, um, anything and everything. Nowadays, in the age of instant gratification, we're all used to getting those dopamine spikes at a instant, and those help us to not feel what's trying to be felt in order to be released, right? And with all of these things that are very normal in our society nowadays, everybody's vaping, everybody's this, everybody's that, it keeps your emotions suppressed. Until you decide to let go of these like maladaptive coping mechanisms, basically, those emotions will stay buried and waiting to be felt. Um, yeah, so it's interesting once you zoom out a little bit and you see how everybody is sort of suppressing emotions. Yeah, it's quite fascinating once you see it that way. And then to be able to know what's required to do in order to stop those things, in order to allow yourself to start to feel and to heal, basically.
To feel it is to heal it.
Absolutely. And this is something I learned firsthand and I learned the hard way because I was also subconsciously suppressing my emotions through all these actions that we just mentioned. I was so dissociated from myself. I was so out of touch with my own body. I was living in my mind. Your mind is like a safe space to go when your body isn't safe for you to live in, right? And then you're just living in, it's like a spaceship that you go far away and you're so dissociated. And then you're living life like on autopilot without actually feeling and being present, being, aligned with your authentic self, basically.
It's so true. I've definitely experienced that for me for a very long time. It was very hard for me to feel the totality of my emotions.
Right.
There was a lot of perhaps shame in
Yeah,
having certain
absolutely.
feelings because you grew up hearing you should be grateful,
Yeah,
you should
absolutely.
always, be happy, don't take this too seriously, let it be, it's okay.
Yeah.
People have it worse than you.
Yeah.
And I find it really interesting when people say like you should be grateful for your life because others have it worse than you. That's
Yeah.
never sat well with me. I'm like,
It's not a comparison
it's not a
game.
comparison
Yeah.
thing.
People will always have it better. People will always have it worse. That just stops you from feeling what you need to feel.
Exactly.
Basically.
Allow
Yeah.
yourself to feel whatever you need to feel.
Yeah.
No shame, no guilt. It is what it is. And from that space, then you just surrender as well,
Yeah,
right? It's
absolutely.
like, okay, a lot of us, because we haven't learned how to properly feel our feelings or to even talk about it, we do find that it's something that's alien to us. It's like foreign.
Yeah.
Luckily in my life, I feel like I have a few people, like my best friend. I grew up with her, like really expressing her emotions.
Awesome.
And I was like, whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, she's angry, she'll express it.
Yeah.
She's sad, she'll express it.
Yeah.
And I just found that to be like such a breath of fresh air.
Absolutely.
Even if it's too much,
Yeah.
it's like the right people will be there, even if it's like a lot of emotion, even if it's like something that I wouldn't touch myself or I
absolutely.
wouldn't go there myself.
Yeah.
But it also gives me the permission to say, hey, you can go there.
Yeah,
You're allowed
absolutely.
to go into that space and just completely dissolve for a bit and let life take over for a while and see where it takes you.
Absolutely. No, it's so important. It's so important to be expressive because that's part of being authentic, right? If you're not allowed to express yourself or express your emotions, then you're essentially repressing everything, right? So it's funny that you mentioned that you have a best friend like that because my best friend's the same.
Really?
Ever since we met, basically, he's very expressive and he speaks his mind. And it was, like you said, a breath of fresh air because when I first met him, I'm like, whoa, you're so natural. Like, you're so authentic. I was used to repressing everything and just, following the straight line and not bashing into the walls. He was like, no, why do we have to do it like this? Like, this is how we're supposed to do it. I'll get angry when I need to be angry. I'll get sad when I need to be sad. I'll tell this person he can't do it. And that's what started molding my perception of my past conditioning, basically.
That's amazing. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, no, it's really
Thank God
funny.
for best friends
For
that
sure,
allow
right?
us to be exactly who we are.
Absolutely.
Because that made a huge difference in my life. Because
same
before
here.
that, it was like, okay, let me go cry in the bathroom and
Yeah.
nobody will see it. Or
Yeah.
let me not express myself because that's just, too much. And
Yeah.
ultimately, it comes from wanting to be loved.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like,
Absolutely.
I'm going to act this way because I just want to receive the love from this person.
Absolutely.
And once you realize actually that that's not the case,
Yeah, absolutely.
you're like, okay, I'm gonna drop the mask, and
Yeah.
you're gonna see all versions of me, and sometimes it's
Absolutely.
pleasant, and sometimes you're gonna get dragon lady,
Yeah.
and that's also okay too,
Yeah, absolutely. I tell my friend I'm always trauma dumping on him. I let him know everything, but he's willing to, to listen and to help.
Yeah.
It's funny because, like you were saying, it actually all stems from your first relationship with your caretakers or parents or whoever brought you up, based on if they were able to handle your emotions or not.
Yeah.
You learn from a very young age,
Yeah.
if you're allowed to express yourself, you will express yourself. If you see that my emotions aren't valid, you will learn very quickly to suppress them because you need your parents, right? You need that love. So that's where the attachment comes in. And you will always, as children, substitute authenticity for attachment. If you see that I can't be my authentic self because this person doesn't like it, you immediately learn to hide that, repress that, so that you get that love or attachment.
I love the way that you frame that. It's really, really true.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's something that I've learned, through experience, through therapy, through things like that. You get to learn these things, and it's fascinating because it's very true. You'll see that children who so as children, there's something called co-regulation, right? So when we have tantrums or emotions, we don't know how to regulate them ourselves. We need a parent to come in, to help us, to hug us, to kiss us, tell us things are going to be okay. And if you don't have that, you tend to, again, repress yourself to form that attachment with your parent. And then the problem with that is later on, you don't learn how to self-regulate, right? Because you never got that co-regulation as a kid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And there's so many different types of scenarios because actually in my case, both my parents are pretty expressive with their emotions.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like judging
Yeah.
it myself
Right.
and being like, that's wrong. And that's not how we should act.
Yeah.
And there's a better way of doing this.
Yeah.
And so I feel like actually that came more from like my way of being like these emotions, because they were not regulated on their side. It then made me feel like there was something wrong as well.
Yeah.
So I do feel like there is a responsibility to self-regulate
Yeah.
too, without spilling our emotions all over the place either. Like
Absolutely.
I do feel like there's kind of like that balance
fine
and
line,
fine
yeah.
line
Yeah.
between how much of like if I'm really angry, am I gonna go and like completely lash out, or am I going to actually say, you know what, I need some space.
Yeah.
Let me go do what
Yeah.
I need to do, come back to myself, and then regulate my emotions so that I may speak to you from a place of truth. And it would be truth because I've been able to remove the heightened emotion.
Yeah, the reactivity.
The
maybe.
reactivity
Yeah,
from it.
absolutely.
I feel like the reactivity part is where a lot of people damage relationships.
Absolutely.
And where it could be resolved in such a different way. And I feel like that's been something for me as well. We're talking a bit about like cycle breaking at, a bit earlier.
Yeah.
For me, one of the things with cycle breaking is providing a different solution to what has always been done.
Absolutely.
It's like, let me see if there's another way.
Absolutely.
Like
A
this
better
way
way.
and a better way.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not better for you, but it's better for me.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's been one of the greatest things that I've started to implement. It's like, I've seen all of this my whole life being done this way.
Right.
Is that the way? Or is it the conditioned way? Because I do believe that there are so many creative solutions
Absolutely, of course.
and so many unique ways that things can transpire. And that actually miracles are possible in situations where you don't know what to do and you don't know how to handle them with your own human mind. And
Right.
so you, again, it comes back to surrendering it and being like, hey, this situation that I find myself in where there's this conflict with this person, I don't know how to resolve it myself.
Right.
Can you show me a better way? And I feel like that's allowed for the path to then be revealed. And then you take
Absolutely.
it and you're like, huh, that's new.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I'm creating something new.
Absolutely. And something new that you would like to pass on to maybe your children one day,
Yeah.
or just the same way that you want to deal with everybody that you meet in life, right? You were taught a certain way to deal with things, like you were saying, but maybe there's a better way. And that's what cycle breaking is all about, like you were saying. And that's why it's so difficult, right? Because you need to first be highly self-aware to realize that this is what I've been told, but this isn't necessarily how I would like to react into the world, right? Or how I would like to act into the world. So yeah, it takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of courage, a lot of work to be able to break these intergenerational cycles, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they run really, really deep.
Really deep. This is
Yeah.
like ancestor deep. This is not just
Exactly.
like your parents, right? So your parents
Exactly.
are the way they are because of their parents, so on, so forth, all the way back, right?
Yeah.
And then especially in our region, we grew up in, war-torn regions. All our parents likely lived through some wars, whether it's in Lebanon, Palestine, wherever it may have been. So they passed that stress, anxiety on. They didn't have access to healing modalities like we do today. They didn't know about meditation and therapy and yoga and healing and all of this stuff, right? So it was just passed on to us, essentially. So I feel like now in the world, in this day and age, with all these access to all these different modalities and access to social media, we're at like the biggest renaissance of healing there's ever been, essentially. More and more people are going to therapy, more and more people are meditating, doing yoga, all these things that we just mentioned. And I think it's beautiful. And then you have so many people getting into spirituality as well. This is something that me, myself, a few years ago would have been like, yeah, get out of here with all of this stuff. It's, it's nonsense, essentially. Like we were talking about earlier, it's either by inspiration or by desperation. For me, it was by desperation. And then I fell into that. And then you start to expand your horizon into a whole different universe, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if you... Actually, I think I saw on your Instagram a post about a dark night of the soul.
Yes.
Have you experienced that yourself? What's your...
I would say that I've experienced quite a few.
Okay, interesting.
Quite a few. I don't think it's one and done,
Okay,
personally. I feel
interesting.
like there are multiple dark nights of the
Oh,
soul.
wow. Okay.
Because-
So I've experienced one and I thought I'm good now, but now I don't know anymore.
We know this about the healing journey, right? There is no destination,
Sure.
and everything in nature is cyclical. And there's, in life, with creation, there's sustenance that is followed
Yep.
after something creative.
Yep.
And there's dissolution. There's the dissolving.
Yeah, destruction, yeah.
There's the destruction. That's nature.
Yep,
And we are that.
Absolutely.
We're not separate from that.
absolutely.
So again, the humility when it happened again, and to be like, hey, wait, there's more.
Yeah,
Again, coming from the place that I came from, obviously, it was like, okay, I can handle this in a different way,
Right.
without like totally feeling alone or like this is weird or there's something wrong with me or I'm depressed, like not labeling it good or bad, wrong or right, why this again, why am I here again,
Yeah.
rather like total acceptance
wow.
of it
That
and
takes
being like,
strength.
hey, okay, we're gonna be in this space.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's days,
Yeah.
sometimes it's weeks,
Yeah,
sometimes it's a bit longer,
yeah,
but ultimately the light that shines, even if it's like a flicker and you know that it's there and you just keep remembering that,
yeah,
you're like, okay, I can handle this. And
absolutely.
there's nothing to fear because it's all part of the same source.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, there are dark nights of the soul, and I feel like quite a lot of people are experiencing that right now, again,
Yeah.
because of what's happening externally.
Yeah,
But everything that's happening externally is actually because it's happening inside of us, and there's
Absolutely.
a lot of fragmentation.
Absolutely.
And everything wants to come back to wholeness, wants to come back into union
Yep.
with each other. So I feel like as long as we keep seeing our illnesses as separate within our physical bodies, as long as we see illness as separate to the pain of the earth and what we're inflicting on the planet, as long as we see our lives as separate to everybody else's, we're just going to keep perpetuating the same pain
Yep.
over and over again. And I feel like, yes, pain can be a great teacher, but also there comes a point in your life where you're like, okay, maybe, again, there is a different way to approach this pain than what I've learned in my past. Like, I feel for me right now, it's like I don't run away from it, I don't hide from it,
Right.
I don't feel ashamed about it, I don't feel like I need to heal it right away or like put a band-aid on it too quickly. It's
Yeah.
like, let it be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying, everything is interconnected, right? And everything happens, you know, what I've learned, Maria, is everything really does happen for a reason. Life is just a whole bunch of lessons that you learn, right? And then it's up to you to be able to integrate that and to be able to understand, okay, what is this teaching me, right? So when I went through my first and only so far dark night of
Okay.
the soul.
But that's great that you recognize that there was one in the first place.
So when it was happening, I hadn't even come across the term. My whole life just came crashing down, and I was like, "How is this happening?" It was like a horrible time, essentially. But it's sort of like sometimes you need to dip down into the darkness to be able to rise back up into the light, and that's what happened with me. It was such a dark time, but like I said, that's what led me into getting into spirituality, and my whole healing journey started because of that, right? So at the time I was like, how's this happening to me? But now I see that it actually catapulted me into a much, much better space. Although at the time you can't see it, obviously, but when you trust and you do the work, things open up, basically.
That's really beautiful, by the way, that you were aware enough to take responsibility.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the times people don't want to take responsibility for that.
sure.
And they also try to keep it all together
Yeah, absolutely.
rather than free fall in that space for a little while
Yeah, absolutely.
and see what will transpire from it. One of the things that I've learned is that it allowed me to question, how much do I really have in my control?
Yeah.
You know, when
That's
something
a
like
huge
that
one, by the way.
happened, it's
That's
like,
a huge one.
do I really have control over anything?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't. Maybe I need to be a little bit more humble
Absolutely.
and realize that there are so many things far beyond my mind's comprehension, far
Absolutely.
beyond my own
control.
understanding and my control.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
You know, it's funny because it's amazing that you mentioned that, because everybody seeks control as a mechanism of safety or comfort, right? It's actually the ego part of us that likes that control. It likes to know what's going to happen because that's how we feel comfortable, we feel safe. But oftentimes, most of the time, you don't have control over anything. Just look at about how many things are going on in the world and in the universe all by itself, and we have absolutely no control over any of that. So sometimes it pays to just surrender, trust, and flow with the universe instead of trying to force things to be a certain way.
Yeah.
So when I was, a little bit younger, more into my egotistic or ego mind, I was always trying to plan for the future, control the future, force things. I would like to force, and I think that's the human predicament nowadays, is that we like to arrange the external world in a way to please our internal status or our internal world, essentially, right? We want to arrange the exterior to please our interior. Whereas that never works, right? That never ever works. You feel like you get to a point, your ego is happy temporarily, and then it's seeking something else, right? And that's why I think turning inward and fixing the mess that we have inside makes it so much more beautiful on the outside as well, because then you're not in need to control things that are going on the outside as much. You're able to surrender, you're able to flow, you're able to be okay with whatever happens. Surprises pop up, things happen, and you just flow with them as opposed to like stressing over every single thing that happens.
One really beautiful revelation that came through burning out was the realization that the burnout was really coming because I was trying to keep everything under control. And how can we as tiny humans try to control the forces of creation that
Absolutely.
made everything, that created
Absolutely.
everything.
Absolutely.
Like this whole world, the oceans, the mountains, the trees, the animals, the food, like there's a
Everything.
force that created all of that. It created you, it
Yep.
created me, it created all of us. And here I am trying to control all of that.
Absolutely.
How am I not going to burn out?
Isn't it
Like, how am
crazy?
I not going to feel
Yeah.
so separate and so like uncomfortable in my being? Of course I am, because I'm trying to suppress that.
Absolutely.
That which wants to create, that which wants to create new worlds,
Yeah.
new dreams, new realities.
Absolutely.
And I want to stop it?
Yeah, you want
Like,
to stop it.
who
You
am
don't like
I?
this, you don't like that. Absolutely.
Who am I to do that?
100%. You know, the creation, or up until now, we're what, 13, 14 billion years into creation, everything is perfect.
Exactly.
Literally everything is the way it's supposed to be. And here we are saying, no, I don't like this, I want to change that. Doesn't mean that you can't have preferences and you can't like to do things,
Of course.
but it's the forcing aspect, or it's like the friction aspect going against nature as opposed to flowing with it.
Exactly. And to remember that you are, that same energy that flows through all things is flowing through
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely.
And if it's so divinely intelligent, why would I not want that to be flowing through me freely?
Absolutely.
Because then it's like, wow, like what can you create
Absolutely.
in collaboration rather than in resistance towards it?
Yeah, that's beautiful, because it's so true, right? It's only when you're disconnected from your own divinity that you feel like you need to force or to change things in such a frictionless way, right? The minute you feel that you're part of this divine creation or universe, then you become more in sync and you flow a little bit easier, and life just becomes, more smooth, basically.
Yeah. Smooth, and also sometimes it's like, okay, here's a bit of a tsunami,
Yeah.
because life does that too, you know.
Yeah,
There
no,
are
absolutely.
earthquakes, there are volcanic eruptions,
Yeah,
there are a lot of natural disasters.
of course.
And so again, that's the realization of that is going to be part of life at
Right.
some point of a person's journey, whether it's in their earlier years or whether in their early, adult years, or
Yeah.
when they're older. At some point, I do believe that we encounter similar experiences, just at different points in the timeline.
Yeah,
And so then it's again that recognition of how deeply interconnected we really are,
absolutely.
rather than so separate.
Absolutely. And when you get into like the more spiritual teachings, that's what they teach, that everything is not only interconnected, but at the base of everything is really just
One.
one everything, right?
Yeah.
Me, you, the table, TV, oceans, planets, the whole cosmos, basically.
Yeah. It is pretty wild.
It is.
is pretty
Once you
wild.
zoom out, from your day-to-day activities, and just realize, what the hell are we doing on a blue rock spinning through this cosmos? It's it's a little bit fascinating.
And when you zoom in and you explore your gut bacteria, and
Yeah.
you realize that there are more bacteria in your gut than like human beings on this planet.
There you go. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty wild. Like there's a whole universe inside of us too.
Absolutely.
And so that was what you were talking about. It's like more so than like the fixing, but more like the reorganizing, re-engineering, the alchemy that can take place
Yeah.
when you create the right environment for that transformation to occur.
Absolutely.
And it can be something that we can help,
Yeah.
maybe not control,
Right.
but we can help that transformation
Right.
instead of, force it or resist it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, I think that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming on and
you.
sharing such. You speak really beautifully and really
Really?
eloquently. Yeah, I
Oh,
love it.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing your
Thank you
insights.
so much.
Yeah, hopefully this will be able to resonate with some people, be able to help some people.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure it'll reach the right people
yeah.
that want to hear this and who are on their journeys. And again, this is for anybody, because if I were to listen to this today, I feel like there are many beautiful insights that you've shared too. So thank
Yeah.
you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah,
Thank you.
cool.
Thank
you
you.
so